First of all, let me thank Giuseppe Franco Ferrari and Pier Ciro Gaglione for inviting me to take part in this conference. And I would also like to thank the organizers of this event, in particular Rosalba Picerno, for the excellent organization of everything. I have limited time, therefore, for reasons of brevity, I will not be able to address all the points that we were asked to deal with. They've already been underlined previously by Professor Urbani and also by Professor Gerotto. But what I would like to underline, for those of you that are interested in the British system and the issue of public procurement in the United Kingdom, is that a lot of the references that I will be making, and in particular in the final paper that will be published in the proceedings of this conference, I refer in particular to the law of public procurement, which is written by one of the major experts in this field, Sue Arrowsmith. I often make references to public procurement in the European Union by Peter Trepta. And then in particular, I have to say that there is an interesting and recent piece of research by a colleague at the London Metropolitan University, Helena Turnstorm, which deals with the whole issue of a critical study of problems facing public procurement in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Now, this leads me also to underline the fact that actually, although I should be talking about the United Kingdom, I'm going to cheat, and I will actually only be talking about England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, because the discipline for Scotland is slightly different. Now, we've had issues of which is the country that's most exotic. Well, we're on the other side of the English Channel, so I guess there is an element of being exotic here. And of course, and I'm not going to bore you with the whole issue, here we are the only common law country. And this obviously has a lot of influence on the whole issue of contracts. In fact, unlike continental Europe, the United Kingdom has never generally adopted standard terms for government contracts. Whilst templates have been circulated for specific types of agreements, no formal terms have ever been adopted by Parliament. As a consequence, a diverse range of contracts are used. And here, allow me to quote one of our leading public lawyers, Paul Craig, who writes, quote, the eclectic nature of government contract principles is peculiarly English. The unwillingness to codify reflects our dislike of the rigidity that can be attendant upon such reform. We have here our colleague from France, Bernard Puyard. Again, it's as though the English are saying no to any codification, no to the Code Napoleon. But of course, and this is what I'm going to deal with, because I think it's interesting in a comparison, especially thinking about Italy, the whole issue of the implementation of European Union law and the references that were made in particular by Paolo Urbani to the two directives, because I think this is where things become interesting in terms of a comparison. But of course, let us also very quickly underline what we mean here by public procurement. If we refer to Gershon, procurement means the whole process of acquisition from third parties, including the logistical aspects, and covers goods, services, and what is interesting in this context, construction projects. This process spans the whole life cycle from initial concept and definition of business needs through to the end of useful life of an asset or end of services contracts. Now, this is also the definition that is given by the Office of Government Commerce, which deals with a great deal of the issues of public procurement. Now let's come to the issue of the relationship between domestic law, or lack of codified law in the United Kingdom, and the two directives. We have to look at pre- and post-regulations, as they are referred to in the United Kingdom. In fact, we have what is called the Public Contract Regulations of 2006, which came into force on the 31st of January 2006 to implement Directive 18/2004. They govern the coordination of awards of public works. Okay? Then we have the Public Contracts Amendment Regulations of 2009, which are known as the Amendment Regulations, which implemented Directive 66 of 2007, what we call the Remedies Directive, or what Paolo Urbani referred to as the Direttivo Ricorsi. So there we can see this comparison. Now, obviously, there are a whole series of issues as far as public procurement are concerned that apply to various authorities. What I'm going to focus on are local authorities because of the context of this conference. Where do these regulations apply? The regulations apply when a local authority seeks offers in relation to a proposed contract that has a value above the stipulated threshold, and here we see a similarity with things that have been mentioned by other colleagues, and does not fall within one of the identified exclusions, which I'm not going to list here. Contracts under regulations include the provision of goods, services, and again, public works, as well as framework agreements in respect to such provisions. Now, as far as public works contracts are concerned, the financial thresholds are currently, and it's a very precise figure here, £3,927,260, because unlike Estonia, the United Kingdom has still not joined the euro, and I don't know whether it will do. These contracts are exclusive of VAT. Contracts with an estimated value of less should not be subject to the regulations, although there are some exceptions on this point. I'll leave that to my written paper. Now, what about the procedures? Obviously, there are things that are familiar, but I think it's interesting to see these procedures and see how they've been applied in the British context. And funnily enough, unlike what Professor Urbani was saying about a very good implementation on the part of Italy, if I understood correctly, this is not necessarily the case as far as the UK is concerned, and there have been problems on this point. As you all know, a local authority must use one of 4 different procedures: open, restricted, negotiated, or competitive dialogue. The open and restricted procedures are the default procedures available to a local authority. The former is commonly used for simple procurements in narrow markets whereby any interested party can submit a bid. Under the latter, only those carried forward from a selection and invited to tender can submit a bid, provided that there are a minimum of 5 bidders being taken forward. Generally, the restricted procedure is used in situations where the requirements can be statically defined. The competitive dialogue, on the other hand, was introduced in a new procedure by the regulations to tackle large and complex contracts, and reference has been made to this earlier, such as those under the Public Finance Initiative and the famous public-private partnerships, which had previously, before the EU legislation, been procured through the negotiated procedure. Under competitive dialogue, a minimum of 3 bidders are invited to engage in the dialogue to define the solutions and the terms under the contract. What about the negotiated procedure? Here, the local authority negotiates the terms of the contract with a minimum of 3 suppliers. Now, another thing here, I'm stating the obvious, is that common to all these procedures is a requirement to publish the intention to award a contract in the official journal of the European Union, and also to publish an award notice once the contract has been concluded. Now, let's look a little bit more into detail about how these procedures work in the British context. For competitive dialogues, an initial selection is made mostly using what we call pre-qualification questionnaires, PQQs, from which a minimum of 3 bidders are invited to participate in dialogue. Dialogue is then used to formulate solutions to achieve the aims identified in the contract documents. When dialogue has been concluded, final tenders are formally invited by the local authority. At this stage, only clarification, specification, or fine-tuning can be sought from the supplier. And here again, I think it's important to remember the case law, or rather in this specific case, the opinion of the Advocate General Lens in the Commission versus Belgium, as far as the definition of clarification, specification, or fine-tuning are concerned. I don't want to go into the details of the case. Could I have some water, please? By contrast, the open procedure does not have a separate pre-qualification questionnaire or dialogue stage. Thank you very much. But is merely a process inviting and receiving bids. These are assessed against the published criteria, making a decision who to award the contract to. Of course, the restricted procedure does not have any room for negotiations before the tenders have been submitted, but clarification can be sought on what has been submitted. Finally, as far as the negotiated procedure is concerned, there is a definition of scope for negotiations with any bidders taken from selection. Now, what about selection? Well, following selection, we have obviously the awards stage, which considers the actual merits of the submitted tender. An award of a contract must be based on either A, the lowest price, and again, I think we can see a lot of similarities with what happens in other countries, or B, the most economically advantageous tender, MEAT, meat, carne. The meat criteria can include both cost and qualitative elements, usually reflected through different types of weighting. Qualitative elements can include capacity, technical merit, aesthetic elements, so here referring to what Matza was saying earlier, and functional characteristics, but also customer care policies, sustainability, and of course, environmental characteristics. Now, another thing that I will leave to the written paper is the whole issue of possible contract variations, which I think are interesting, but I can't go into detail here on these issues because of a question of time. Let's look, therefore, at this point at the issue of remedies and the implementation of the Remedies Directive, La Direttiva Ricorsi. The Remedies Directive was transposed, as I was saying earlier, in 2009 through the introduction of the amendments regulation. It was born out of a recognition that the inadequacy of the enforcement mechanisms had led to illegal direct awards being made across member states. Now here the Commission, some of you may know this, commented, quote, "The lack of effective remedies in the majority of countries, coupled with a mix of different approaches, creates uncertainty, creates loopholes in the legal system, and cannot provide the expected level playing field." Now, under the old UK position, which is still relevant to procurement started before the 20th of December 2009, if a contract had been awarded, the only remedy available to an unsuccessful supplier was damages, or still is damages for those procurements prior to 2009. Arguably, this is insufficient as a remedy because of the difficulty in quantifying losses, or indeed the collateral benefits being awarded a contract. Well, what changes in the amendment regulations? Again, forgive me if I'm simplifying to a certain extent for reasons of brevity. Well, the first change was a formal adoption of the Alcatel ruling, the case 91 of 98 of the European Court of Justice, whereby local authorities must observe a 10-day minimum standstill period between communicating the choice in supplier and the award of the contract. In communicating their choice, local authorities must issue a so-called standstill letter to all bidders. The second change introduced by the amendment regulations is a suspension in the procurement process when court proceedings have been initiated before the award of the contract. Okay, this creates an automatic injunction and places the burden on the local authority, but I'm not going to go into